Dad, since you're living here now, I think it would only be fair if you started helping out a little more. She said it calmly. No shouting, no anger. She even had a slight smile on her face, as if she were simply stating something perfectly reasonable that any normal person would agree with. I was standing at the kitchen counter, holding a dish towel in my hands. A skillet with eggs was cooling on the stove. There were 2 plates, 3 cups, and a grocery list sitting on the table. It was 10 minutes before 8. My daughter Megan was sitting across from me, scrolling through something on her phone. Her husband Ryan had already left for work. I looked at her and asked, "What exactly do you mean by helping?" She looked up. "Well, pretty much everything around the house." I said nothing. She continued. "Groceries, cleaning, cooking, laundry sometimes." "You're hoe anyway." I didn't answer. I slowly placed the towel on the counter. I was 62 years old. I had worked as a railroad electromechanical technician for 40 years. I had repaired equipment at 3 in the morning during freezing rain. I had climbed towers when other men refused. I had provided for my family. I had raised a daughter. I had spent 35 years with the woman I loved more than anyone in the world. And now, 9 weeks after my wife's death, I was standing in my daughter's kitchen, listening to her explain that I was home anyway. I nodded. "Okay," Megan smiled. "I knew you'd understand." She lowered her eyes back to her phone, and I went upstairs to my room. I closed the door, sat down on the edge of the bed, and for the first time since my wife died, I understood one simple thing. I wasn't living with my daughter anymore. I was living in her house, and those were 2 very different things. My wife's name was Rebecca, 35 years. That was how long we had been together. We met when I was 25, and she was 23. She worked at a small library in a suburb of Columbus. I went there one evening looking for a technical manual. She told me they didn't have it. I told her they should. She said I was too confident. I told her she gave up too quickly. She laughed. A week later, I went back to the library. Not for a book. A month later, we started dating. A year later, we got married. And 3 years after that, Megan was born. Rebecca always said Megan was the loudest child in the world. She could only sleep in complete silence. Yet she made more noise than 3 children combined. She sunk, she danced, she fell, she cried. Then she got back up. When she was 7, she once told her mother, "I'm never going to move far away." Rebecca looked at her and said, "All children say that." She was wrong about one thing. Megan really did move far away. After college, she moved to Denver. Then she met Ryan. Then she married him. Then they bought a house. And our family gradually became the kind of family that called on Sundays. We saw each other on Thanksgiving, Christmas, sometimes during the summer. I never complained. She had her own life. I had mine. And Rebecca had a heart big enough to somehow keep making room for everyone. When she got sick, everything changed. At first, the doctors said it was a routine complication. Then came more tests. Then hospitals. Then medications. Then nights when I slept in a chair beside her bed because I was afraid to go back to our bedroom. She hated it when I felt sorry for her. One morning she looked at me and said, "Tom, if I die, don't become a man who just waits for his life to end." I laughed. "You're planning to die, and you're still bossing me around. That's why I have to say it now." I took her hand. "You're not going to die." She looked at me and said nothing. 2 weeks later she was gone. Her heart stopped during the night. I was there, holding her hand. And I learned that sometimes a person can lose an entire lifetime in a matter of seconds. After the funeral, I stayed alone in our house. For the first week, I barely left the bedroom. Her favorite mug was still sitting in the kitchen. Her cardigan was hanging on the hook. Her hairbrush was still in the bathroom. I couldn't put anything away, couldn't throw anything out, couldn't move anything. Every object felt like a piece of her. Megan came 4 days later. She hugged me so tightly that I felt her tears on my shoulder. "Dad, you shouldn't stay here alone." I said, "I'll manage." "No." She shook her head. "You're not managing." I wanted to argue, but I didn't, because she was right. At least, at the time, that's how it felt. 2 weeks later, Megan started talking about the house, not directly. At first, she asked, "Are you sure you want to keep living here?" Then, "The house is huge." Then, "Maintenance must be expensive." Then, "Maybe it would be easier for you to sell it." I didn't want to sell it, but the house reminded me of Rebecca. Every room, every photograph, every scratch on every cabinet door. Eventually, I decided Megan might be right. I sold the house. I put part of the money into an investment account. I kept enough to live comfortably for many years. Megan said, "Until you figure out what you want to do, stay with us." I asked, "Are you sure?" She hugged me. Of course, Dad. And I believed her. I sold most of the furniture, kept a few boxes, Rebecca's old chair, photographs, my books, a small wooden table where Rebecca and I had eaten breakfast for almost 20 years. The rest went into storage. I arrived at Megan's house in early April. It was a beautiful home, 2 floors, a large kitchen, a garage, a living room with a television almost the size of the wall. I had a small bedroom upstairs. Megan said, "You can stay here for now." I smiled. "Thank you." And at the time, I genuinely believed she was saving me. I didn't understand that 9 weeks later, I would be looking for an apartment where nobody could tell me, "You're home anyway." The first 2 weeks were fine. Ryan left for work in the morning. Megan worked remotely. I walked a lot. Sometimes I sat at coffee shops. I sorted through old photographs. I tried not to get in the way. One evening, I cooked dinner, steak, potatoes, salad. Megan said, "Dad, this is amazing." Ryan took a second serving, then a third. I smiled. The next evening, Megan asked, "Have you figured out what we're having for dinner?" I thought she was joking. "Not yet." She looked at the clock. "I have a meeting until 7 tonight." I understood. Okay. I made pasta. The next day I made soup, then chicken. Within a week, cooking had become my responsibility without anyone ever discussing it. But I didn't object. I actually enjoyed it. I was used to taking care of my family. Maybe that was my mistake, because people get used to whatever you willingly do for them, especially when you never tell them where your kindness ends. The first list appeared at the end of April. I found it beside the coffee maker. Milk, eggs, Ryan's coffee, yogurt, chicken, sparkling water, laundry detergent, dish soap. At the bottom it said, "If you're going to the store, could you please pick these up?" I did. 3 days later, there was another list, then another. Then I started asking myself, "Do you guys need anything from the store?" Megan would answer, "If it isn't too much trouble." I heard that phrase often. If it isn't too much trouble. I didn't notice how quickly it was turning into, "You should." In May, I washed Ryan's clothes for the first time. I came back from a walk and saw a laundry basket beside the washing machine. It was filled with his shirts. I figured Megan was busy, so I washed them, dried them, ironed them, hung them up. Ryan came home that evening. He looked at the shirts. "Oh, great," and walked away. He didn't say thank you. I didn't think much of it. A week later, another laundry basket appeared outside my bedroom door. I stared at it, then at Megan's bedroom door, then back at the basket. He sighed and carried it downstairs. That was how my new job began. No paycheck, no days off, and no title. At the beginning of June, Megan said, "Dad, we're having a party on Saturday." "Okay." "About 15 people." "Okay." She smiled. "You'll help, right?" I looked at her. "Of course." "Great. I want everything to look really nice." On Friday, I bought the groceries. On Saturday, I got up at 6 in the morning. I cooked the meat, made salads, prepared appetizers, baked a pie, cleaned the kitchen, wiped down the tables, arranged the chairs. At 3 in the afternoon, Megan came downstairs. She was wearing a beautiful dress. She looked at the table. "Dad, this looks amazing." "Thank you." She smiled. "Can I ask you one thing?" I already knew I wasn't gonna like it. "Of course." "When the guests arrive, could you maybe stay upstairs for a little while?" I froze. "Upstairs?" "Well," she spoke quickly. "Ryan invited some coworkers. They don't know you. And I don't want you to feel uncomfortable." I looked at her. "Me? Well," she shrugged. "You understand." No, I didn't, but after a few seconds I did. I asked, "And where do you want me to eat?" She looked at me as if the question were strange. "You can eat later." I nodded. "Of course." She walked away. I stayed in the kitchen. Then I looked at the 15 plates, at the meat, at the salads, at the pie, at the glasses, and suddenly I realized there wasn't even a seat for me at the table I had set. That evening, I sat upstairs. A plate of food rested on my lap. People were laughing downstairs. I heard Ryan's voice. I heard Megan's. Every now and then someone asked, "Who made all this?" And Megan answered, "My dad." Not, "Dad made dinner for us," just, "My dad," as if I were someone who happened to be in the house and happened to do something useful. At 10:45, I heard, "Dad." Megan was standing at the door. "Yes? Can you clean everything up tomorrow morning?" I looked at her. "Yes." She smiled. "Thanks." She closed the door. I sat in the darkness, and for the first time since Rebecca died, I wanted to cry. But I didn't. I simply realized it was time to leave. The next morning, I called an old friend. His name was Walter. We had worked together for almost 20 years. He had been living in a quiet residential community for people over 55 for some time. "Tom," he said, "are you looking for an apartment?" I answered, "Yes." He was silent. "Is it really that bad?" I looked at the bedroom door. Worse. 2 days later, I went to see the apartment. It was in a quiet neighborhood, small, bright, 1 bedroom, but it had the most important thing. It was mine. I could put my coffee cup wherever I wanted. I could read until 2 in the morning. I could cook or not cook. I could leave the apartment at 7 in the morning. I could come home at 10 at night. Nobody expected me to be useful. The woman showing me the apartment said, "People here are very nice." I smiled. That works for me. I signed the lease. My move-in date was June 18th. For the next 12 days, I continued living normally. I cooked, did laundry, bought groceries, took out the trash, helped. But inside, everything had already changed. I no longer expected gratitude. I no longer waited for an invitation. I no longer hoped Megan would one day say, "Dad, sit with us." I was simply preparing to leave. I bought boxes. At night, I packed my things. Photographs, books, documents, clothes, Rebecca's old mug, her photograph, and the chair. I couldn't leave the chair. It was the last thing I truly considered part of our home. The morning of June 18th began at 5:20. The house was quiet. Ryan was asleep. Megan was asleep. I got dressed, went downstairs, made myself coffee, looked around the kitchen. I had stood there so many times, washing dishes, chopping vegetables, cooking dinners, packing lunches. Now everything looked different. I left an envelope on the table. Inside was a note. I wrote, "Megan, thank you for letting me stay here after Mom died. I found a place of my own. Don't be angry. I need to learn how to live on my own again. Dad." I thought about it, then added, "I am not leaving your life. I'm just leaving the house." I put down the pen and walked out. My car was already packed. The chair was in the back seat. The boxes were in the trunk. I started the engine, looked at the house, and for the first time in months, I felt calm, not happy. Not yet, but calm. I pulled onto the road, turned on the radio, then turned it off. I wanted to hear my own thoughts. I drove for about 40 minutes. When I saw the sign for my new residential community, I suddenly smiled. I was 62. I was starting over, and for some reason, that didn't scare me. My new apartment was small, but when I put Rebecca's chair beside the window, it immediately felt like home. I put up the photographs, arranged my books, hung the old clock. The kitchen table was a little smaller than our old one, but I could sit comfortably by myself. That evening, I made myself scrambled eggs, sat down, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't hear, "Dad, can you?" There was no list, no laundry basket, no expectations from anyone else. Just silence. I turned on the lamp beside Rebecca's chair, sat down, and said out loud, "Rebecca, I think you would have liked it here." Of course, she didn't answer, but somehow, I felt better. Megan called 3 hours later. I didn't answer. 10 minutes later, she called again. Then Ryan called. I looked at my phone. 12 missed calls. I didn't call back, not because I wanted to punish them. I simply needed, for the first time in a long time, to not do what other people expected me to do. The next day, Megan left a voicemail. Her voice was trembling. "Dad, please call me back. I don't understand what happened." I listened to it twice. I didn't respond. The next day, she called again. "I found your note. Why didn't you tell me?" I still stayed silent. On the third day, she said, "I thought you were happy living with us." And that's when I finally called. "Hi, Dad." "Hi." She was silent. "Did you really leave?" "Yes." "Why?" I looked out the window. "Do you really want to know?" "Yes." "Then don't interrupt me." She said nothing. I started talking. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse her. I just told her about the lists, the laundry, the groceries, the dinners, the fact that I no longer felt like her father, the party, how I had sat upstairs alone while 15 people ate the food I had prepared. About what she said. "Could you maybe stay upstairs?" There was silence on the other end. Then Megan said, "I didn't mean to humiliate you." "I know, Dad." "I know, Megan. Then why did you leave?" I looked at Rebecca's chair. "Because you didn't mean to humiliate me. But you did anyway." She started crying. I didn't understand. Exactly. She was silent for a long time. Then she said, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I looked at Rebecca's chair. "Because I'm your father." "And what does that mean?" "It means I got used to putting up with things for my family." She sniffled. "You shouldn't have. Now I know." A week later, Megan came to my apartment. alone, without Ryan. She stood at the door and looked completely different, not like the woman who ran a large household, like my little girl, the same girl who used to be afraid of thunderstorms and come into our bedroom at night. She looked at Rebecca's chair. "You brought it, of course." She nodded. Then she saw the photographs. "It looks nice here." "I like it." She sat at the table. I put a cup of coffee in front of her. She looked at it. "You still make coffee the way Mom did?" I smiled. I learned from her. Megan smiled through her tears. We talked for almost 3 hours. She admitted that after Rebecca died, she had felt lost too. That she was scared seeing me alone. That she thought if I lived with her, everything would become easier. And then she got used to it. Used to me cooking. Used to me cleaning. Used to me buying groceries. Used to me always being there. "I turned your help into an obligation," she said. I nodded. Yes. She closed her eyes. "I'm really ashamed." I nodded. "Good." She looked at me. "Good?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because if you're ashamed, it means you understand." Ryan came 2 weeks later. I expected a difficult conversation, but he surprised me. He stood at the door and said, "Tom, I owe you an apology." I invited him inside. He sat down. "I thought you actually wanted to do all that." "Why?" He shrugged. "Because you never said it was difficult for you." I looked at him. "Ryan, when a grown man sees his father-in-law washing his shirts every week, cooking his lunches and buying his groceries, he should at least ask why." He nodded. "You're right, that was all. No excuses." And that's why I accepted his apology. 6 months have passed. I still live in my apartment. I have a routine now. I get up at 6, take a walk, drink coffee twice a week. I go to the community center. I started helping people with small repairs. Old outlets, shelves, door handles, light fixtures. Small repairs. It turns out 40 years of experience can still be useful to someone, but now I only help when I want to. That is a huge difference. On Sundays, Megan comes to my apartment, sometimes alone, sometimes with Ryan, sometimes they invite me to their house. But there is one rule now. I don't serve their household. I come as a father. I sit at the table. I eat. I talk. I laugh. Sometimes Megan and I cook something together, but she never leaves a grocery list for me anymore. And one day, as I was getting ready to leave, she said, "Dad." I turned around. "What?" She smiled. "Thank you for leaving." I frowned. "That's not usually something people thank you for." She shook her head. "If you had stayed, I would never have understood." I said nothing. She walked over and hugged me, and for the first time since Rebecca died, I felt that my daughter truly saw me. Not as a helper, not as the man who was home anyway, not as a widower who needed somewhere to go, but as her father. Sometimes I think about that morning, about that sentence, "Since you're living here, you need to help." I could have caused a scene. I could have accused Megan. I could have packed my things and slammed the door. I could have demanded respect. But I did something else. I simply left. And now I understand something important. Sometimes the strongest answer isn't proving someone wrong. Sometimes the strongest answer is refusing to live by rules that are destroying you. For too long I believed my value depended on how useful I was to other people. If I cooked, I was needed. If I fixed things, I was needed. If I solved problems, I was needed. If I endured, I was a good father. But that's not true. Love shouldn't be a paycheck for being useful. Family shouldn't require you to disappear for their convenience. And getting older doesn't mean you're obligated to accept a life that no longer works for you. I'm 62. I'm a widower. I miss Rebecca every day. Some evenings are still harder than others. Sometimes I wake up and for a few seconds forget that she's gone. But now I wake up in my own apartment. Her little pillow is still in the chair by the window. Our family photograph hangs on the wall. My coffee cup is in the kitchen. And nobody tells me what I have to do. I decide. And maybe that's what Rebecca meant when she told me, "Don't become a man who just waits for his life to end." I'm not waiting. I'm living. And for the first time in a very long time, I understand. I don't have to earn my place at the table. I don't have to be useful to be loved. I don't have to make myself smaller so someone else can be comfortable. I am allowed to take up space. I am allowed to say no. I am allowed to start over, even at 62. Especially at 62, because life doesn't end when someone no longer needs you. Sometimes that's when it finally becomes yours.